Good morning, everybody, and thank you to the inaugural podcast launch at SLC College. We're here at the Cornwall Student Union. We decided to launch this initiative this year, and we have our very first guest today helping us launch our new project. Thank you for coming in. Why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Carilyne Hébert. You can call me Carilyne, however you want to pronounce it. I'll take it. I am an SLC alumni. I am an executive director for the Social Development Council of Cornwall and area. I'm a city councillor. And what else do you need to know? I love to cook.
That's great. Yeah. A lot of people like to cook. A lot of people like to eat. So I feel like that's a very valid skill. And so for myself, my name is Shannen Bélanger. I'm the vice president of the Cornwall Student Union. I'll be hosting today. And behind the scenes, we have the lovely Nandish, vice president of communications. And maybe he'll make an appearance, maybe not, but he's working in the back. So we thank him for that. And I guess let's just jump right into it.
Sure.
So let's start off with the beginning. Not the beginning, but the beginning. So you said you were SLC alumni, right? So tell us about your time here. What'd you take? How was your experience?
Yeah, it was. It wasn't a one-shot deal. I did come and leave and come back. So I graduated high school in 2006, and I kind of knew where I wanted to go in life, but not really. I knew at the time, gotten involved with a lot of like volunteer stuff, and I wanted to help people, but I didn't know how, because that can span a lot of different things. And I was also never a great high school student, so I never took the pre-university credits. So as I was approaching graduation, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. I thought I'd take a year off and figure it out, but then I thought, no, I'm going to waste a year. So I should probably go to university, because they cram that in your head when you're in high school, right? You have to go to university. The only way I was going to get into university was by doing a first year of college and then using that as a way into university. So it was like mid-June. Everyone had already been accepted to where they were going, and I was like last minute. I applied for the business program, the 2-year business diploma, only thinking I would do the 1 year. So September 2006, I started here at the first year of the business program, and I really enjoyed it. And I then applied to Carleton University. I had a couple of programs I was thinking of, maybe human rights, maybe international development, and still my grades weren't they still reflect on your high school grades, and they thought, we want you to come here, but how about you take political science instead?
Okay.
Because although I have a life in politics, I didn't want to go take political science. I thought, okay, we'll take you in poli-sci year 1, then year 2 you can maybe transition to human rights or whatever you wanted to do.
Interesting. Okay.
So I left St. Lawrence, where I had small classrooms. I made friends. I could talk to my teacher. They were accommodating. It was a great experience. And then I was popped into a class of 400 kids who I didn't speak to, nor did I speak to any of the teachers. I was living off campus, so there was no campus life. It wasn't SLC. It was a whole different experience, and I didn't love it. And so I did a semester and called my mom at 2 a.m. and writing an essay, thinking, I don't want to do this. Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And she said, okay, whatever you want, honey. Very supportive mother, almost too supportive. Love you, mom. Like do what you want kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I lived in Ottawa for a few more months and then came back home, and still didn't know what I wanted to do. Got into some jobs that I just was kind of working for the man, I'd like to say. And but really wanting to get back into the work I had done in high school. So in 2010, summer 2010, I was working in payroll for a big local corporation, and a 9 to 5 that you could leave at work, and that it doesn't. But I wasn't fulfilled in any way, shape, or form. So I started applying for jobs in the nonprofit sector, and there was a job that became available for the Social Development Council of Cornwall and area, where I work now. And I interviewed for it, and I was told that I was, basically the best candidate for the job, but you don't have any completed education.
Of course, you got to have that paper to get into anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I obviously it lit the fire under my ass, and I quit my job. Well, I gave them 3 weeks notice because the semester was starting in September, and I was able to jump into the second year of the business diploma several years after I had done the
Okay,
first
but at
year.
least it carried over, right? So
Exactly. And I was kind of like the new kid because everyone had spent the first year together. And but I came in and I made friends, and it was a really great experience. Again, sort of the same teachers I had just a few years previously, so I had already a good relationship with them. And then what I think the most I guess the greatest part of that second time around experience for me was, well, I also was on the student union for a brief time.
you were a
Represent
student
Yeah,
union
on
as well.
yeah, I represented the business program. I don't know if that's still how it
Oh,
works, but
actually, so we have the board of directors now.
okay, it was the board then. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so basically we have the executive team, which is Craig, who you've met.
Yeah.
That's the ED. And then there's the three of us, so myself, Nandish, and Safa, who is our current president.
Okay.
And then we have our board of directors, which is 6 students, one from each of the schools.
Okay.
So we have one from business, we have one from I guess what's the computer one again? The applied sciences and arts, I think. And then there's the trades and all of them. Yeah. So we have one from each school. So
So I did that, which was great, but it was short lived because come I think it was early February, a job came out that I would have loved, but I was still in school. You know, it runs till April, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, I'll just go and see. And so I applied and I interviewed, and they gave me a job as the volunteer coordinator at the Agape Center. And this is exactly why I went back to school. I wanted this kind of work.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it was early February. I still had 2.5 months left to go.
Yeah.
So I spoke to all the teachers, and they were so proud that I was able to find something in the field. Obviously, the job was, we expect you to have graduated come April.
Yeah, of course.
And so for February, March, and then the rest of April, I was able to do most of my work from home. I came in for exams and tests and the necessary things, but I was able to finish my full-time education and work full-time. And my bosses at the Agape Center were really great at the time. So everyone was super flexible and worked around what my schedule was with work. And I was able to graduate in April with my business diploma and have start a career that I had been really wanting.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That is amazing. It's actually one of the things that, so myself, as a mature student coming back, I have a wife, I have 2 kids. We bought a house up here in Cornwall, and being able to balance school full time, because I am a full-time student as well. And being able to, I find that here, like you said, in the smaller college scene, it's very different the way that the teachers approach. It's like a bit more realistic, right? If I'm like, hey, I gotta go do something with my kids, or especially post COVID, my kid gets a cough, I gotta keep her home for a week, So it's like I had to always make that work, and it's through like the help of the teachers here that I've been able to maintain a 3.9 GPA.
Excellent.
As a full-time parent homeowner in a new town without any support or services, because I don't know anybody up here. And it's been an incredible experience here at SLC. And then now I work on the union, which is also amazing.
Yeah.
And a ton of support from, it's just like, it's such a nice place to go to school.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's really cool too that they were able to kind of do the same thing for you.
Yeah.
And us at the union, it's the same thing. It's we have a 1-year contract year to year, because you have to be a student as well to maintain a position there. But it's the same thing. It's if you find a job in your career that you've been wanting to take, go get it.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole point.
That's
why we're here.
I was here.
That's why we're here.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's amazing. And so obviously that was a huge impact on your career.
Set my path to where I am now. Yeah, absolutely.
That's incredible. Do you have any specific teachers or somebody you like to shout out from the school from back then?
Mikey baby.
Okay, I'm sure they'll know.
So I had a lot of really great teachers, but Mike Pilon, but I don't know, we just had such a great relationship with him that we all called him Mikey baby.
Okay.
I think he's retired now. He's on the one of the school board trustees. He's elected school board trustee.
Oh, okay.
But he taught here in the business and marketing and whatnot, and he was so accommodating to his students, and he was always in the greatest mood, and just like so Mike was great. but I had a lot of really great teachers, so I can't really
They just didn't have as
pick.
fun nicknames.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's a
yeah,
little hard
yeah,
to remember.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel that. That's amazing. So then kind of following up on that, so you started your job at the Agape, right?
Mhm.
And what happened from there? And what is that? Just so
Yeah,
people
so
know
the
what that is.
Agape Center is Cornwall's biggest food bank. It is also a soup kitchen and a thrift store, and so many other things as well. So I was there for I think I was there for 2 years as volunteer coordinator. But when you work in nonprofit, you quickly realize that it's your job description is much larger than it is on paper, right?
Yeah, of course.
So I didn't go in every day and strictly recruit, manage, and run the volunteers, right? It was so much more. So if the volunteers don't come in and it's too late to bring anybody else in, I'm the one stocking the shelves. I'm the one working in the kitchen. I'm the one, you're the one doing all of the work. And then you're also involved in the fundraising and everything else, the whole operation.
Yeah, of course.
And
As a nonprofit, you have
yeah,
to be able to survive, right? That's its
absolutely.
own job.
And take out the garbage once a week, right? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you got to
You're
do it all, right?
yeah.
So, and I loved what I did there. And the only reason I left was, well, the other thing with the nonprofit sector is you don't make a lot of money.
Yep.
And I had just bought my first house, and there was I don't know how a company or a mortgage company gave me a mortgage. I think I would have gone bankrupt quite quickly. And
Yeah.
and I remember my last day there, like basically kicking and screaming as I was leaving and crying because I didn't want to leave. But I had found another job in the nonprofit sector that paid a little bit more, and
Yeah.
I was able to, sustain that for a few years afterwards. But that was strictly the reason I left. I loved that organization, and I think to myself, maybe I'll retire there. Maybe I'll go back and
Yeah, of course.
one day. But from there, I went to work at Contact North. I was the center coordinator there. I think they were here at some points. Contact North lived in the college, but it is a provincial nonprofit that is strictly online learning. They don't provide the online learning, but they're sort of like, the way I explained it back then was, they're like Expedia, but for online learning. So
Oh, okay.
if you're looking to access any kind of education, but you need it to be accessible, this is pre-COVID, right? This was in 2012 ish, 13. And so we had folks coming in, and either they needed some training courses, high school completion, college, university, and everything in between. We'd help them find what was available, help them register, help them find, or help them do the OSAP application, whatever it took. We even
Okay.
had a center with computers; people can come access and do their education from there. We did
Wow.
so,
Okay.
yeah, and I was there for 4 years, and we basically the motto we would tell ourselves was we were changing lives through education. And
Oh, wow.
from there, I went and I worked at the Eastern Ontario Training Board for some time, a couple of years. EOTB is another local nonprofit. They had received a grant to create and deliver a career navigation program for youth. And so basically, they brought me on to their team, and I created this program that we tested out with the schools, and then I did train the trainer with career teachers so that they can implement it. But it was a lot around, obviously we want kids to follow their dreams and their hopes and aspirations, but also the reality of like what the labor market's going to look like in 5 years when you graduate, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
so including that, and just like reality of what career guidance, and the jobs you may want might not exist in 5 years,
Yeah. No. Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So it did some of that, and at some point, uh, before all of that, I ran for council. We could talk about that later on,
Yeah. We will be getting to the council. Don't you
um,
worry.
but through council, I was also appointed to the board of directors of the Social Development Council. One councillor is appointed there,
Okay.
and the Social Development Council is the organization I didn't get a job for back in 2010 because I didn't have my education, right? And
Okay.
so then I was sitting
Okay.
on the board, and loved that. And I was sitting in the boardroom for one of our meetings, and the executive director at the time came in, and he sat down and he says, before we start, I just want to let everybody know, I'm giving you my 4 weeks notice because I've accepted a position somewhere else. And before the meeting even started, I raised my hand and I said, I'd like to move that I take a leave of absence starting immediately because I knew this was the kind of work that I wanted to do, and we can
Right.
get deeper into what the SDC does. I had been wanting that since early days of my career nonprofit, and so I took a leave from the board, applied, interviewed, the whole thing, and
I mean, that was the
here I
place that
am.
you initially wanted
Yes,
before you had
yeah,
graduated. So that's like a dream come true for you.
yeah.
I would have
So
hopped on that too.
yeah, so I'm have been the executive director of the Social Development Council for a little over 5 years now, and it is a job that I feel it is sort of made for me and what I want to do in the sector, in the nonprofit sector, because I've worked frontline right at Agape. Yes, I was the volunteer coordinator, but I'd also do intake if I needed to, and I dealt with the clients, and um, I struggled with that. The weeks where our frontline worker was on vacation, I would step in and spend a week doing intake for clients, and those were some of the worst weeks of my life because I'd take it all home, and it was the frontline work was really difficult for me. um, I knew that I knew people were struggling. I knew, there was poverty in our community. It's why I wanted to work in this sector, but spending 7 hours a day 5 days in a row hearing folks and their stories was devastating. So I had to sort of change my mindset then. Like, imagine if we weren't there to help them at the time when I was working in the sector. But part of me was like, I want to stop this from happening. And I think if you ask anybody who works at a food bank, their ultimate career goal is to lose their job because poverty doesn't exist and people
Yeah,
don't need food banks,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah, it's great that we have them, but we shouldn't
Yes,
need them.
exactly.
So you can keep
So
your working your way up the food chain, pun
yeah.
intended, and see where the problems are.
So I wanted to get to a role where I didn't have to do the frontline work so my mental health would stay in check,
Yeah, absolutely.
but do the overarching work that might hopefully one day prevent somebody from having to use a food bank. Policy development, changing services so that people aren't falling between the cracks and falling below the poverty line and needing to access those services. And let's change our structure within our services and our policies so that we can eliminate poverty. Which is
Yeah. And I would imagine too that your job has doubled in intensity since COVID.
yes, yeah, and it's not even just so a lot of what the Social Development Council does or had been doing is poverty reduction, but it's expanded to so much more now. Like, mental health is a huge component of what we do. Access to health services, poverty obviously, and financial stability, but also just like overall community wellness, community well-being, community safety. There's been so much social isolation, and so people are craving a sense of community. There's just been so much. So it's the thing with this kind of organization is it shapes to the needs of the community. And so what we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and at the beginning when we incorporated in, I'm gonna say 2008, has changed significantly and
Yeah,
will
of
continue to
course.
change. It's changed in the last year, from what we were doing, but it's because we're trying to react to the needs of the community.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, that makes sense. The community evolves. So does the people that have to represent it, support it, fix it, change it.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's always valuable,
Mhm.
right? So that's interesting. You're like, this is awesome information too. Cause I also think a lot of people don't quite understand. When you talk about things like that, I mean, you talk about, the social development council, people are like, okay, those are 3 words that we know individually, but what does that mean
Yeah.
for me? Or what do you do?
Yeah.
Or what does the council do? Because, especially we talk about politicians a lot,
Hmm.
right? We were joking earlier that, politicians aren't always the most above board people, and a lot of people have distrust
Yeah.
for politics. So when you start talking about, councils and people that run the city and things like that, obviously that does come with some negative undertones
Sure.
sometimes, because I also think that people just don't understand.
Yeah.
So when you come and, another thing that you mentioned earlier, like when you had to leave the Agape Center, right? And you were saying that the reality is like, I couldn't afford to work there anymore.
Hmm.
That could sound poorly for people who need to access the food bank. They're like, well, you left because you just wanted more money, and then you end up being one of the, like, you end up kind of in that pool of where people see
Well,
counselors as you need more money. But I think
I was making $14 an hour
this,
and I
and
couldn't pay a mortgage,
no,
right?
and I
So
think and I think that's the thing too. Like it's important that people have to be able to understand that. Look, in order for people like us to help you, I also need to afford to live.
absolutely.
And also people mistake people making money at nonprofits for greed.
Yes.
And I think
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that's something that's very important to
So
clarify.
let's talk about that
Yeah.
because so this is a whole thing. There's a stigma within the nonprofit sector. People think we can do it for free and we can run organizations on volunteers, and volunteers make our community, make most of our organizations, but who's going to run them?
Yeah.
right? And who's going to actually get the work done if a volunteer doesn't come in? And so organizations that are like a million, like the Agape Center at the time when I was there, like the folks we were helping 40 people a day, if not more, and then 130 in the kitchen. And if you just hope volunteers show up that day and they don't, like, then those people aren't being helped. So, and then but the thing is the people in the nonprofit sector are underpaid, severely underpaid because of that stigma. So I was
Yeah.
working 50 hours a week on a minimum because I loved what I did and it needed the extra help. And I was making, like, I think $14.50 an hour at the time. Okay, this was 2011. But still, I
Yeah.
had somehow just bought a house and I couldn't. So anyways, so even the executive director of the Agape Center at the time, there was a lot of folks who were just angry at her making money. And it blew me away because we were like 15 staff, 200 volunteers, like a 7-day a week operation, $1 million operation because of like all the food costs and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah. Of
And
course.
people expected her to make $20,000 a
Yeah.
year.
Or nothing.
Or nothing.
Sometimes.
Or nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. You're doing
Nothing.
this for free.
Nothing.
Yeah.
But like, how you cannot get, like, the alternative is you just hope that retired people take on these jobs, and it's not possible. So yeah, so I think she maybe made like 50 some $1,000s a year. But if you take that whole operation and you put it in the for-profit sector, she'd easily be making $150,000.
Oh, or more.
And people won't blink at that, and they're not dedicating their careers to
Because
helping
you
people.
put the label as nonprofit, and people take that as like you don't make money. And I think people misunderstand that the whole meaning behind nonprofit. It's like, well, there needs to be some money somewhere for
Yeah.
someone to run this place. I mean, the person who's running the Agape Center also needs a roof over their head.
Sure.
And if they made
Yeah.
$0, or like you said, if it was even barely 50 grand, I mean, that's not that much money. That is, in today's day and age, that's not enough for a mortgage on an apartment.
Definitely not.
You know, which is a whole other topic of conversation.
Yeah, we can get into.
That's there too. But so I think it's also, and also just kind of like a side note / question. When you talk about places like the Agape Center or your social development council and places like that, do you find are there a lot of students that go and need help, or what kind of people do you, I guess, focus on? Maybe the wording I'm looking for.
So here's the thing. Poverty doesn't discriminate.
You're correct.
And so it can be literally anybody. It can be students. It can be someone who last year made $150,000 a year, but something happened in their lives and they have found themselves in a position. And we saw those when I worked at Agape, and we're talking a lot about Agape, and I feel like that was like a million years ago. But I remember there was a family that used to come in a lot and not understanding their story because they used the soup kitchen, and you didn't need to get approved to use the soup kitchen. You can just use the soup kitchen.
You're trying not to be discriminatory either.
Yeah. And if you didn't want to do the assessment, I think it was like $1. You can come in and eat for $1 or something like that. So, and it's a full meal. It's enough calories to keep you going for the whole day in case it was the only meal you're eating.
Amazing.
And like a year later, they came back and made a donation. It was like $100. And at that time I was taking their donation because I was working the front desk as a volunteer who was supposed to couldn't make it that day. So I was working the front desk.
Of course. And
so I was filling in their donation, and like they looked familiar, and then they told me their story without even pushing. And they were a family that had a business and it just fell apart, and they lost so much money. They went bankrupt and they had nothing. And they had 3 kids, and it was enough to, once you fed them and put clothes on them and sent them to school, there was no money left. And so the parents came every day to save money, and they ate there. And but with time and some of the supports they were able to get, they built back up, and now they're both working, and they both had enough money that they wanted to give back. And so they came, and so you really, like, these were business owners that struggled through, and you have no idea who's struggling. And unfortunately, something like 50 or I can't remember the number, but like 80% of those who are qualified to use the food banks don't, because of stigma, because they feel,
of course,
people will see and people will judge and whatnot. And so you're only getting a sliver of those who could come use the service. And that's still, they're all at capacity, but there's so many people out there who are struggling quietly and afraid to ask for help. And that's a shame, because there are services out there. There are programs that are willing to help people. And sometimes you just need that little push, and then, you'll be able to, build your life back up. But you really have no idea. So many people are like one crisis away from slipping below the poverty line.
Oh,
Right?
I mean, I could tell you from personal,
Yeah.
a personal
Ditto.
story is, is when I lived in Ottawa, which is where I come from. My wife and I, very, very full-time employed career people. And, we had a nice home that we were renting, and, our kids were always fed and had clothes, and so did we, and whatever. But like you said, I was one crisis away from not being able to pay and lose my house.
Yep.
Like, and we were, so I was a full-time truck driver, and that pays pretty decent. It was a good job. And my wife also worked at the same logistics company as
Okay.
I did. And I mean, we're doing what most people would consider very well. And it looked like that on the surface, because sure, we had a car, but like I needed that to get to work.
Yep.
And okay, you have a big house. I had 2 children. Like
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to choose if I can afford to have kids or not.
Yeah.
We've always wanted kids.
Mhm.
And then, but one bad day was like that could be it.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
you're living a paycheck to paycheck when you're making 6 figures sometimes, and it's ridiculous.
Absolutely.
And I think that's also, you touched on another misconception, is that people who require the food banks or services or anything like that, they're lazy bums. And that's, you hear that all the time, and it's not, because there are times where I'm like, maybe I could actually use this service, because there were some days where like I'm not sure if I'm going to get through, and I am the furthest thing from a lazy bum.
Mhm.
I'm a mature returning student. I have 2 kids. I work full time.
Yeah.
I work my ass off.
So I think, well, let's talk about the Social Development Council and one of our projects,
Yes.
which can link to some of this. So
Yeah, please do.
So we don't deliver frontline services, like I was saying. We kind of work in the background. We bring the nonprofit sector together. We try to find gaps in services. We work together to fill them. And we do that in 100 different ways. We got a lot of really great projects going on. But one of our bigger projects is called Vibrant Communities, Our Safety and Wellbeing Plan.
Okay.
And it, at its core, started as a poverty reduction strategy. So how to address poverty across Cornwall, SDG, and Akwesasne. And it has evolved, and it is still, at its core, poverty reduction. But when we first started building the strategy, basically it's a 70-page document on how to create a better quality of life for the region, with actionable items that we as a region can take on. The college is a partner in this work as well. So, but we wanted to make sure that the plan was reflective of the community. So the first thing I did was create a survey that we launched to the community, and basically asked, of these, I have 16 societal issues, what are your top 3? What are the 3 that impact you the most, or if you're not in a position where you're struggling, you believe impact people the most?
Okay.
And we started with an online survey, and we pitched it out to the community. And a lot of the people responding, because we asked, where are you from? Glengarry, Stormont, so we can make sure we're equally representative of our population.
Yeah, of course.
And then we also asked, like, are you a person with lived experience? Do you work in healthcare? Do you work in education? Do you work in nonprofit, government, whatever, or for profit, whatever? So we can get an idea of who's actually responding to the survey. So the first half of the survey period, for the most part, was people like working in the sector, obviously working with folks who are living in poverty, but maybe not experiencing it themselves. People working in healthcare, people working in the human services sector.
Right.
And at that time, if you looked at the survey data, the number one issue was education. So I think when you don't understand what someone's going through, you think, well, just give them a good education and it'll fix all the problems. So we were really wanting to make sure that we had a big percentage of our survey data coming in from people with lived experience.
Right.
And at the time, the social services department, which covers Cornwall and SDG, was doing their homelessness enumeration survey at the time. Well, so you can't support the homeless if you don't have data to hopefully get the funding to do the work. And you can't find data on homeless.
You have to go to somebody with some numbers.
Right. But
Yeah.
there is no data on homelessness, because if you're homeless, you don't have an address to answer a census.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of, so what the province implemented was that municipalities would actually go and take the survey data, and they would take the paper survey along with like goodies. If you fill out the survey, you'd get like free gift cards and whatnot. So it was an incentive to participate. And they went across the region to parks, to food banks, literally under bridges at night, to try to find people who are struggling.
Wow.
To respond to the survey, to collect the data so that they can maybe make a plan to address it. Anyways,
Yeah.
while they were doing that work, they snuck in our survey. And so of the 700 responses we got, at least half came from
700. And what kind of time period was that?
It was the summer. We spent it was July,
you got
August.
700 reports in one summer.
Yes.
Of people who participated in the survey.
Yeah, and
that is a lot.
It was good. It was actually, you think it's not, but it's a good segment of our population.
That's a massive data sample in that amount of time, considering you're looking for people who don't have a home.
Yeah.
It's like you said, it's a double-edged sword. You're really happy you got a lot of numbers in the data.
Yeah.
But you got 700 people to answer a survey.
Yeah, not all of them lived experience. Some working in the sector, but at least half came from lived experience. Be it from this survey with the human services or the social services department, or people who just answered online, whatnot. So when we entered all the data from the lived experience folks, the priority shifted completely. The number one priority became mental health. The second priority became access to health services, and the third became financial stability, poverty. Right. So that tells us if you are struggling financially, getting a job, going to school is not your first priority. You need to make sure your mental health is in good working order. You need to make sure your health is in good working order. You need to make sure you have a roof over your head and you know where your next meal is going to come from before you even consider education and before you consider going to work.
Yeah, that's gravy, right? You need your building blocks of safety and security before you can even begin to thrive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's telling us that folks who are struggling want to get to a better place, but there is so much to uncover. Poverty is different for everybody. Poverty is complex. Poverty can mean 1,000 different things, and it could be it can be generational. We see a lot of that in our community, unfortunately. It can be, due to the pandemic gave us a lot of situational poverty, right?
Yes.
So it can come from so many different things. So I think that's where we realize that, okay, if we're going to make a poverty reduction strategy, we can't just focus on increasing people's income, although that's a big part of it. Yep. We need to make sure that we focus on mental health, on actual health care, on well-being, on everything else. So people are set up to succeed instead of set up to fail. Because if we put somebody who is either homeless or precariously housed and just pop them in a job, odds are they're going to quit, because odds are they don't have a cell phone where they can call into work sick, or or to get their shifts, or they don't have access to reliable transportation, so they're chronically late, and so employers need to understand that as well. So you need to make sure they're in a better position so that they can find sustainable employment. It's not that they're lazy, it's just that there's 15 other things they need to focus on.
Yeah, well, and I mean, and even like just getting an interview, like you need money to get an interview, because you have to be able to take the bus, you have to be able to wear nice clothes.
Exactly, and you need a haircut. You need,
I mean, I can even tell you, my very first job ever, when I was first year of high school, was at McDonald's, and which I think a lot of us did, but even
Blockbuster.
Oh wow, you just age yourself.
Yeah. Sorry.
I also remember the Blockbuster days. I don't have a card anymore though, but when I started at McDonald's, I was a young high school kid, and they still had like kind of crazy expectations right off the bat, and I'm like, I'm a starving high school student with like an absolute terrible car that I barely got here with, so that I could get a job to like do better. And I was fortunate. I got the job, and but that job is also what got me into other jobs.
Yeah.
But I also was only able to do that because I still lived at home with my parents, and I wasn't paying for college, university yet. I mean, you kind of come from a spot where your basic needs are met.
Yeah.
You can't continue to grow. It was the same thing with coming to Cornwall, right? Like for me, I couldn't even think about going back to school, because I always wanted to change careers and go back to school, back to you need the piece of paper, right? But I couldn't do that until I was safe and secure. And in this case, my children and my wife. I can't just not work. I can't even think about college, university again until I make sure that everything else is fine. And that baseline is impossible to achieve, especially if you're already in a situation. Right? How do you get a job if you're homeless? If you can't get a suit, you can't get a bus ticket, you can't, or it's just this endless cycle, right? And it's so tough. So is there like, let's say, what's like one project maybe that you've been kind of working on that's in that 70-page document that you guys had? Like, what's one small thing that may help?
Oh my gosh, are we just strictly talking about? So actually, so something it's fairly recent. We are part of the Social Planning Network of Ontario.
Okay.
which is a sort of a membership thing. And so there are other organizations across the province that do similar work than us. We're not like a brand or anything like the United Way. We're all independent, but we come together. We have meetings on a regular basis. 4 of those communities got together, applied for a grant, and ran a program, or an initiative called the Many Faces of Urban and Rural Displacement.
Okay.
And so here in Cornwall, and Cornwall, SDG, and Akwesasne, and 3 other communities across the province, I had a bit of funding. I hired somebody part-time for the last year, and she interviewed 51 people who have faced displacement.
Okay.
So people who have either been homeless, who have been evicted, or are at risk of eviction, whatnot. And she sat and she spoke to them and heard their stories. Because as much as, numbers and data is really important, so are the stories.
Yeah.
The stories are going to tell us what needs to change. And so with those 4 communities, the data has been collected, and now this really comprehensive report is being written with recommendations that we can use as a tool to go to the province, to go to our municipal councils, and say, if we change this, this, and this, we will see less of what we were seeing during the interviews. So this is what I mean by, like, we're not delivering frontline services, but we're trying to do the work in the background to prevent people from falling into these situations where they're being evicted because of, ridiculous reasons. And then the other piece that she focused on and is just launched is our local tenant association.
Okay.
So
great timing on that topic. I was actually going to say, let's segue into that, because you are you a member of the tenant association?
So the tenant association is run by volunteers, but supported by the Social Development Council, and we do a lot of that.
So that's where you guys are linked together. Okay.
Yeah. So Anna, who is our staff member who's working on this project, she was also tasked with engaging tenants, and that looked different in every community. But here, we didn't have a tenant association. We have a landlord association, and they're very strong and they're very loud.
Yes.
And they can advocate for themselves.
Yeah, of course.
But tenants, on the other hand, not so much. And so Anna was starting to meet with tenant leaders, and I said, why don't we move forward on a tenant association? So her job was to make sure before her contract ends, because with nonprofit, there's always an end to the funding.
Yes, of course.
It was to start this off. And so we have 3 really strong volunteers as the chair, the co-chair, and the treasurer, and the secretary. And we provide backbone support. So we do this with a lot of organizations in the community that want to get things started but don't have the nonprofit status.
Yes.
Sometimes you want to apply for the grant, but you need that nonprofit status. Sometimes you want to host an event, but you need $1 million in liability insurance. We have all of that, right? So as long as what you're doing sort of fits within the vision and the values of our organization, we will support you. We are one of the main organizers for the upcoming Cornwall Cultural Festival, because it fits what we're doing. We're working in partnership, but we're providing the administration, the banking, all of that. Anyways, so the tenant association is just getting off the ground and will be supported by us for as long as they need. We have a meeting on this upcoming Thursday, and so it's just the core group. We're trying to get things running, and hopefully it'll get to a point where they have sort of monthly meetings, and there's a tenant membership, and they can advocate for each other and even advocate for changes within the systems. And we'll support them with things like I mentioned, the administrative work, and go to their meetings and make sure that we can help in whichever way possible. But the dream is one day they can incorporate, be a nonprofit, and sustain.
Right. So that was actually going to be what I was going to say. So basically, like, your job on the council is to support an organization like the tenant association that's trying to basically do what you're doing. Yeah. Okay, so that actually kind of clarifies it too, because I wasn't exactly sure about the tie-in.
Yeah.
So you don't work for the tenant association; you're part of the council that helps support this company.
Yeah. So if you look at our bylaws within the SDC, there's a list of working groups, and so what we do is, in our bylaws, we've amended them to include the tenant. The Cornwall and Area Tenant Association of Cornwall and Area, which is the name they decided. Okay. And they will be a working group, so they can be as independent as they want, and I can provide support, and so can our assistant.
But they're
Mel.
They're
part of our organization.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That is super interesting. Yeah. So let's talk about housing.
Sure.
Because obviously, and this is also where it really pertains to the students, right? We have a problem with housing.
Sure do.
So what is the primary focus of the tenant association group? So they come to you and they're like, look, we need to do something about housing.
Mhm.
What is it that they're coming to you with?
So they're not going to come to the SDC because the SDC doesn't have frontline services, so we can't help people specifically.
Okay.
But ideally, they will do advocacy where they can support tenants if they're in a pickle, there's something going on. They can provide the right information, guide them to the right place, or if there's something like a renovation happening, they can get together and they can maybe. It's hard to stop these things from happening, but advocate
Yeah.
for them, and we can support them in all that advocacy work. They might want to go to councils, like actual elected councils, and make presentations on some of these things they want to see changed. And but in terms of housing, I think the main goal is to support folks in keeping them housed, and
Yeah.
and reduce the number of evictions that we're seeing, or making sure people are in safe housing, because that's an issue. We have a lot of landlords who don't really care what the state of their apartments are and are renting to people, and are ignoring their concerns about mold and infestations and whatnot.
Yeah.
And people are so desperate for housing right now. So if you would have asked somebody 5 years ago, you know, or if you go back 5 years ago and somebody was living in a place that was run down, decrepit, what they could do is leave that place and find another.
Yeah.
Easy peasy. Something better for the same price.
Yep.
Right now they can't. They could, especially if they've been there for a long time and they're kind of grandfathered into a decent rent. If they were to leave, they could easily double. Could be the same place across the street, and they're going to double. So people are staying in these places that are unsafe
To save the money.
because they have no choice,
Yeah.
because they're stuck. And so hopefully making sure that people can advocate for themselves, or they have the tenant association to do that, and go to bylaw and go to the right avenues to make sure their landlords are kept accountable, and making sure that there's safe housing, so that
Yeah.
so there's existing housing. And I think that's kind of where the tenant association will want to advocate for, is to make sure people stay housed and are in.
So their primary focus isn't necessarily trying to get more housing. That's kind of a separate issue, right? But the tenant association is focused on basically people who are renting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And I think like one of the things that we see here, right, is back to that landlords are not really taking good care of their properties, or they're taking advantage of people. I think they're in a position where it's easy to do so because there is a lack of oversight a lot of the times with tenants.
Yeah.
And also especially in small town like Cornwall, where right now so our projection for next year's student population is I think it's 50 or 60% international.
Wow.
So these are, and I think so, like we spoke about earlier, we're anticipating 850 or so new students.
Wow.
With more than half being international. So that right there, that's at the minimum 400 people.
They can't stay at home
that
and
need a
live with
place
their
to live.
parents.
Yeah,
right?
and unfortunately, so we do have our housing on campus, of
Yeah.
course, but it's not nearly as many units as we would like to have.
Of course not.
And part of that is also an issue with developing, right?
Mhm.
Getting anything built or added onto or whatever is a long, arduous, difficult task.
Expensive.
So, and it's expensive, right? And that's kind of it's a cycle, because to get the money to pay for that, we need to have the money coming in, which means people don't have houses that are coming in, right? So it's tricky. So that's kind of like a two-pronged issue with the housing things, right? So, with the tenant association specific to, the students and things like that. Okay. Is there so like, can somebody go, so let's say you're a student and you're having a hard time with the landlord. A student would approach the tenant association, right? And they would say, look, I have this, they're charging me too much, or they took a legal deposit, or I have questions. Like, can they bring like a lease to have looked over? Like, do you know what they kind of do?
So we're early stages, right? But I think first thing first is they'll recommend where you can go, and where that would be as a legal clinic, right? So the tenant association can say, this is what your rights might be, and here's where you can go to fight for them. It could be the bylaw department, if it's an unsafe thing. But if it's anything legal, the local legal clinic is incredible and have been supporting tenants for a very long time. And we're hoping, with the tenant association supporting tenants, they might have less of a workload. But really, if it's that kind of stuff, there is an organization that does that kind of work, and that's the Legal Clinic. And but this is the things that there's so much out there, but people don't know. People don't know it's available. Goes back to what you were saying. People really have no idea the process or whatnot, and so it's to bring forward an organization that does, and then can support folks navigating that whole system.
And that's amazing. And then you guys obviously support the tenant association so that they can do things like this.
Exactly.
So I think it also kind of, now it all makes more sense when you look at, because I think a lot of people also rope it all as one big thing, right? You're on the council, or there's the social development council, and everybody goes to you directly because that's where it's all from. And it's like, no, not quite, right? Like they're like groups that are independent. They do their own thing. We're here for some oversight and for some assistance, but you don't go to the social development council for an issue with tenants. You go to the tenant association
or the legal clinic, right? Or bylaw, or the right place. So a lot of what we do at the SDC is making sure people know about existing services. We do a lot of information sharing. We host monthly community spotlights on local organizations. People can register for free and learn about these different organizations. We have one this Thursday morning for 211, which is a service I wish everybody knew about. And
what is 211?
211 is a number that you can call like you would 911, and they can connect you to any local service. It is a national thing, so our partners are out of the Ottawa area. There is a database of every program and service available in the region, and so you can call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They offer it in 150 languages.
Wow. So, I actually didn't even know that existed either.
Well,
so
yes.
You should, people should know about this,
absolutely.
especially people who aren't from here.
Yeah,
to try to find something.
What we've been doing is recording, because they're all virtual. We've been recording the sessions. We're putting them on our YouTube page so people can go back and watch them too. So
okay, so that's actually really interesting.
So come this Friday, we'll have it up. People can go watch the workshop basically that we're having this Thursday and learn about 211. And then when you call, you can say, I'm hungry, I'm homeless, I'm anything, I'm looking for a doctor, I'm anything, right?
Okay.
And they will connect you. If it's during working hours, they won't just give you a number, they'll actually hard transfer you to the Gap-A Center to make an appointment.
Wow. Okay. Yes. That's incredible.
Or ask your address and connect you to the nearest food bank, the nearest housing organization, the nearest whatever, right? And so they'll help on hundreds of different things. And what we love about 211 as a partner is every quarter they send us data on unmet needs. So of course there are sometimes people that call and need something, but there is nothing in the area that can support it. And so we'll get a report that says this many people called from your region,
right?
This many access services on housing, on food, on financial stability, on education, blah blah blah, healthcare. And then these are the ones that didn't get connected to anything and what they were looking for.
Okay.
So it helps us in our work in trying to address the unmet needs and the gaps in services. And, the bigger one right now that, we were talking about housing is, folks really want to see a homeless shelter in our region.
Yes.
We don't have a homeless shelter.
Yes.
And so, that's usually the bigger one. There is access to housing for people who are homeless. It is limited. And so there have been things behind the scenes within the nonprofit sector for years now, trying to get something going. The biggest problem right now is there's like no capacity within the sector. So there was an opportunity a couple of years ago to do something, and it was launched out to all the organizations, and no one had the staff capacity. No one could do it because it was of the cost, right? You can't just put beds in a room and expect it to change people's lives.
Yeah.
Right. You can't, it needs to be staffed, and you need to have, addictions and mental health counselors on site. You need to have, all the peripheral services.
And like you've been talking about, that's exactly what you've been doing on the council, is working from the top end so that the frontline services aren't as necessary.
Exactly. So, and when you say the council, that's the Social Development Council, which has nothing to do with my role on the on Cornwall Council.
Yes, sorry.
That's okay.
I need to remember that. Yeah, I'm just short forming it. But with the Social Development Council, that's your goal there, is to avoid needing to use the services.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, actually, I wanted to talk to you about the city councilor stuff and the other council, but I know
running out of time.
We are running out of time. So I think At this point, if there's anything that you would like to say or shout out, or if there's a resource you want to tell students, shout that out now. Let them know,
Sure.
and maybe at some point we can have another meeting, because I think there is so much to talk about.
I could, yeah,
There is
absolutely.
you did say you wouldn't have enough time to get through
I
the whole
sure
list.
wouldn't.
I was well over prepared. So I think that at some point we can maybe discuss more things specific to the
Yeah,
city council and things
and
like that.
I guess on the council side of things, there's a lot happening in housing. And the problem with
Yeah.
government is that it moves as slow as molasses. And so 9 years ago
Student
at
government
the
over here,
yeah.
I feel ya. Yeah.
So I ran for council for the first time 9.5 years ago. I was 25 when I put my name in because I hated the government and I wanted things to change. And I thought I'll fix it from the inside. And then you get inside and you realize, oh man, everything is hard. You don't have as much flexibility, or you can't do as much as you think you can because the province basically dictates everything you can do.
Yeah.
All of that stuff. Although we are still making a difference, it is slow. So I've run 3 times now, and I'm on my 3rd term, and it's hard. But it is meaningful when you actually know you've changed. You're able to change things to make things better for folks. But there are things. We just housed hundreds of folks within the new unit, the new building on 9th Street. There's
Yes,
another
I
one
saw that
being-
go up. So
yeah.
that's and I believe half of them or something like that are affordable units.
There's a few market rent, and it's
Yeah.
we don't want to segregate people. That's the problem,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
So people are upset that that didn't go all to social housing. There's geared to income, there's social housing, and then there's market rent, there's accessible units. So there's all kinds of stuff. And
Sorry, that's a really good
windows
time
are
to be
being
watching
watching.
our windows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and but there's another one being built on Pitt Street because our social service department runs for the counties as well. There's some in the counties. There is more movement on housing in the last 2 years than I've seen in the last decade,
Which is amazing.
It's all in the background. There are other things coming out. And a very last bit of information about the homeless stuff. If someone finds themselves in a homeless situation, they don't know where they're going to stay tonight, present yourself to the emergency department, the Cornwall Hospital.
Okay.
They will do it. The crisis team will assess you. If you're a runaway teen, they'll take you home. If everything's safe at home, if you're a woman that has been going through domestic violence, they'll bring you to the right space. But if you are an individual who is homeless, the city has domiciliary hostels or partnerships with a bunch of different places in town and in the counties where you can be placed for a certain amount of time until they can help you find housing and whatnot. So we don't have a shelter. It is needed. I'm not saying it's not needed. The goal right now is to make sure we don't need a shelter. So let's build enough actual housing.
Yeah.
So folks don't have to be living on a cot for months and months or years. Let's get them into a space where they can actually have the dignity to live a full life. So that's a lot of the work that's happening. And there is some other stuff around the shelter that is happening in the background. I would love in a year's time for there to be better news on that.
Yeah. But I mean, hey, you've been doing this, like you said, 3 terms. You just keep going.
Absolutely.
That's the key to all of this. It's like you said, things are slow. Well, then you stick around. And I think that's what
it.
you're doing. So
That's
that's amazing. Thank you so much for coming out and talking to us today. I hope that we can do some more follow-up, because you are full of stuff. And obviously you've got some amazing initiatives. This means a lot to you, like very obviously.
Absolutely.
You're in it to get things done. So thank you so much for taking the time today.
My pleasure.
And hopefully we can see you again soon.
I hope so too.
And this concludes the inaugural podcast, everybody. So thank you for all checking in, and we hope to see you at the next one. Take care.